is based on the MI Safe Start, the My Safe Start phases 1 through 6. And in each of those phases, there are some different things. So we're going to share in some of the presenting here. But if you want to go to the next slide. We'll advance.
I think I got it now.
There we go. So Brent, I think you're going to talk a little bit about the requirements of phases 1 through 3.
Yeah, so for those of you that have read the Safe Start Return to School plan, you're aware, or if you haven't, you're learning now that if the state of Michigan is in phases 1 through 3, or if our region is in phases 1 through 3, which would be a downgrade from where we are currently, there will be no in-person instruction at schools. Schools will be closed. It will go back to how things looked last March or April, and we're going to need to do remote learning. So it's possible that we could start the school year in phase 4 or 5 and at some point be downgraded to 3. And so part of what we need to think about is how fluid can we be with students, and how quickly can we move to fully remote learning if we were to get pushed back to phase 1 through 3 and schools are closed. So at this point, that's not where we are at, but it's something that we need to be prepared for if that were to happen.
All right, and moving on with the phases, Brent just talked about the first 3 phases. So in this whole return to school plan, there are 6 phases. And so I'm going to talk about what phase 4 would look like. And phase 4 is the current phase that we would be in if schools started today. So state of Michigan is in phase 4 where we live. And so what the big change would be is in-person, face-to-face instruction is permitted in phase 4. So we could bring students back in phase 4 to school for face-to-face with a list of required safety measures that we have to put in place. And in the Safe Schools roadmap that Jim talked about earlier, where he emailed that document out, and I would encourage everyone to look at that document. It's many, many pages of different rules and suggestions. But under phase 4, in each of the phases, they have 4 main categories. And the categories are highlighted here on this slide. And the first category is safety protocols, and then instruction, mental and social emotional well-being, and operations. And so each of those 4 categories are outlined in the roadmap with the different requirements. So there's requirements, there's strong suggestions, and then there's suggestions for returning to school. So let's focus on the safety protocols for just a moment. So if we were in phase 4, here are a few of the highlights that are we would be required to do as a school in phase 4. This is not a complete list of all of those things. There are more things that we would be required for safety protocols, but these are the heavy hitters, okay? So facial coverings by all staff. This is all staff K-12. This would not actually qualify for our pre-K staff. So there's some questions about preschool staff. They operate under a different guideline here, and they operate under the Licensing and Regulatory Affairs Division. So that's a whole different thing. So if we have any preschool people on here, that's a whole separate conversation that we would have to have. Facial coverings for all students and during school transportation. So when students are transported in on buses to and from school, they have to wear facial coverings. And we are actually doing this right now in our summer program. We are providing busing to bring our elementary and middle school in on busing, and those students wear a mask on the bus, whether they wear one provided by the school or they have a homemade mask that they're wearing. And then once they get here, the elementary students are not required to wear those. So the next bullet has students in grades 6 through 12 would wear masks. However, students in K-5 would not be required to wear a mask in the classroom. There's some common areas that they would have to. And that's the next point, where K-12 students would all have to wear them in common areas, such as the hallways or going into the cafeteria. They would have to except obviously when they were eating. And then the social distancing guidelines in the classroom, cafeteria, and recess. There's specific guidelines in there. And then in phase 4, family members and guests would not be allowed in the school building. We would, of course, have to have parents come in if they needed to pick up a child, but they couldn't come into special classroom events and things like that, which could create some problems for some families not being able to come into the building. And then in instruction, the instructional piece here is we need to make a district plan for what instruction looks like in phase 4 and what instructional options we are going to offer students. We are allowed to be open with those safety protocols in place, but what does that look instructionally? And Jim's going to get to that in a little bit here. So hold your breath on that one for a second. And then the other things that are in there, which I don't have outlined in this slide, is the mental and social emotional well-being. So there's a whole bunch of things about what are we going to do for students in that area. And of course, that is very, very important. And so I didn't want to pick and choose on those. And then operations, each of those areas, transportation, technology, food service, they all have rules inside of phase 4 that I would invite you to look at. And those teams are going to meet to make those considerations moving forward. So that's phase 4. That's the phase we're in right now. We don't know what phase we're going to be in, but right now that's what phase 4 looks like.
So then if we jump to phase 5, Kelly, you were going to talk about this one.
Yeah, so phase 5 is essentially all of the things in phase 4 that are required now become highly recommended. So phase 5 is, a great place to be because it means that numbers are lower, there are fewer instances of illness, and we're on the decline. So we're headed in the right direction. I would love to be in phase 5. Phase 5 will be a little more tricky because we are going to need a team of people to decide what is our school district going to do when we're in phase 5, because then it's a little more open. Phase 4 says these things are required. Everybody's wearing masks, right? And among all of those other safety and cleaning protocols, phase 4 is very clear. Phase 5 is those become highly recommended. So what does that look like? Do we continue to do all of the things in phase 4, or do we ease up a little bit and maybe not do all of the things that were required in phase 4 that are recommended? So we would need some input on making those decisions, what that looks like in Fennville. Also looking at local data, what does Allegan County look like? What does Fennville look like? Are there 0 cases around here? That might be different than if there still are, we're still seeing new cases. So because the phase, of course, is going to be a statewide phase. So we're going to want to look more locally at our data too to make some of those decisions. So that's the biggest difference. The instruction is going to continue. We're going to be in person and prepared if we need, if things should slide back down. Phase 4 is still the same, but we're going to be in person at phase 5 in some way. We just need to work out the details of what that looks like. That's about it.
Good. And then phase 6, I think Kim was going to tell us a little bit about what that's going to look like.
Yes. So phase 6 is our ultimate goal, and that is our post-pandemic, which basically means community spread is not expected to return, and we are open for in-person instruction, just as we were in phase 5. The majority of the headline areas, such as safety protocols, are no longer required. But some of them, such as the hygiene practices, are still quote unquote recommended, such as hand washing and proper sneezing and coughing into the elbow, reminding students and staff of those proper techniques. That's the major expectation in phase 6. So everyone's back to school and it's close to normal.
Albert, could you go back one slide on that, back to phase 5? When we look here under operations in particular, there are several things that I want you to be aware of that we already have in place, and we can be very grateful for these things. Number one, related to facilities. Not only are all of our buildings air conditioned to keep us comfortable and keep us cool in the heat, that in this time is actually a real blessing, because Kelly and Scott Achterhoff, they were on a webinar with Aramark looking at air handling systems and comparing what we have to some of the ideal situations. And particularly at the elementary, each classroom has its own air handling unit. And that air handling unit has a duct that goes to the outside with a louver that controls how much outside air comes in. And during the course of the day, they can adjust that so that it takes in more outside air or less outside air. Typically, when it's cooler outside, it's opened to bring in more outside air to, they call it flush the room. And then as it gets really hot and humid, especially right now, that might close a little bit and filter and recirculate the indoor air so that we don't get a lot of moisture buildup. But we have the air circulation, we have the air sort of recycling and replenishment, and we also have the air filtration. And some of the filters that we use are the same types of filters that they use in hospitals to purify the air there. So that, as opposed to, say, a building that does not have air conditioning, that has maybe a baseboard convection heater, that doesn't have any airflow. And so that's why you might hear from the encouragement, keep the windows open and keep a fan going to remove the air. Well, we have that already built in to our systems, and everything middle school and elementary were updated in the last bond, and in this bond, the high school units are all being replaced. So by the time we come back to school, we're going to have all of those units updated, and that's a very good thing. With regards to budget, of course, we're monitoring what the legislature does this week, but we do have specifically for the response to COVID, we have some money in they call it the CARES Act money, or ESSER funds, that we will be able to use to purchase things like masks and other PPE items, additional cleaning items, hand sanitizer, those types of items, and that's what we're working on. So I wanted to point those out. With regards to technology, last night, the Board of Education approved the purchase of 525 Chromebooks, I think it was, for just under $100,000. It was 99,000 something. That's going to bring us up to the number of Chromebooks in the district that right now we could be 1-to-1 grades 3 through 12. And then we have some other devices for younger students, but our survey is telling us that not all of the students would require a school device. So we're trying to make that available for our students. So, and then with regards to transportation, we are transporting, it's a smaller number of students, but we're transporting students to summer school. And I appreciate the transportation staff and even the teachers and so forth who are being creative and being innovative with this summer program. We're one of few in the area that are actually reaching out and doing this. And it's mostly outdoors right now. It's really fun to see the students out around the ponds and doing those things outdoors. But as we learn together how we can best do this safely, and students are adjusting. So our real focus is making sure that as we do this safely. So if you want to go on, Albert, to...
Yeah, Jim, can I interject for just a second? Just a reminder of all participants that we are monitoring the chat during this. If you have questions that come up, you can post the questions publicly and we will get to a Q&A session as time allows. If you need to ask a private question that you don't want everyone to see, you can message me directly through the private chat. If you're worried about the content of a question or something, we won't disclose that. So make sure you are using that feature throughout.
Thank you. So now as we talk about instruction and learning options, we've been surveying parents and surveying staff. We appreciate all who've given your insights into that. But one thing that we've recognized is that there is going to be a need and a demand for a full virtual program, something where students can access an online program like K-12. K-12 is the big one that's been advertising. And we want to have a local option for that. So to provide that local option, and this would be on the right-hand side of the screen, the full virtual, Allegan County has come together through AESA, and districts are partnering together to form what is being called Virtual Academy Allegan County. We've got Early College Allegan County that is run through AESA. We have a tech center run through AESA, and this Virtual Academy Allegan County will also be run through AESA. There are some benefits to participating with this. Number one, we get our shared expertise throughout the county in putting this together. The other shared benefit here is AESA gets additional funds for responding to COVID through the CARES Act. And they're intending to put some of those funds into this virtual school, which will allow us to get things going. So if you've been watching or seeing postings, they actually posted for an administrator for the virtual school. And they are now posting for some teachers to be able to teach in that. And what they're hoping to do is hire local teachers from Allegan County districts on loan from the district to the virtual school. One of the questions right now is we don't know how many students across the county that's going to be. If you look at the early results of our survey, about 15% of our students are indicating that they would like a full virtual program. So that would be for those students who want to spend at least a semester doing fully virtual. They would remain enrolled through Fennville Public Schools. They would still be able to participate in extracurricular activities and other specials and those types of things through Fennville Public Schools. But it would not be, and we would be providing what they call a landing space, a room where they could come in and work if they needed some extra assistance. We would also be providing a mentor here in the district who would help encourage them and keep the contact and help meet the needs. So the advantage there for us is they remain Fennville students, and likely a lot of these students are going to want to come back to face-to-face instruction, perhaps in a year, perhaps in a semester, and then we've maintained that connection. They've remained Fennville students, and they can move back in. But as a classroom teacher, you would not have to worry about teaching someone 100% at home on that fully virtual and having your face-to-face. Now, the remote learning piece that you see in the middle, that is the one that is going to take some finessing, and that would be what we would do here in Fennville. So I'm going to turn it over to Albert to describe the face-to-face and remote learning plans.
Great. So this is where it gets a little bit tricky in determining, using terms like full virtual and remote learning. I think we all understand what we mean by face-to-face. And if you look at the bullet points there for a moment, we have that face-to-face is allowed during phases 4, 5, and actually 6, but that's kind of back to normal. And all students are able to attend under the guidance of the Safe Schools Roadmap. And so we know that face-to-face instruction is our desired outcome because we are seeing from the survey, and I think from other research that face-to-face is the best for our students to be able to have them here. Now, we know there's a lot of risks in play right now. However, face-to-face is the desired place to be. Students are going to be more engaged, have connections with the teacher, and we are shooting for trying to make that possible for phase 4 and phase 5. The concept of remote learning kind of took center stage when we canceled school back in March, where we had to come up with our continuity of learning plan, where we had to send materials home with students and make the packets and try to continue some learning opportunities for students. We want to be very clear that this remote learning that we're talking about now is not going to be the same as what the remote learning looked like in March and April and May of this year. We were just trying to fill in the gaps a little bit for kids to be engaged in something for the rest of the year. but not this full remote learning option. And so what we would like to propose is that we have a remote learning option available in all of the phases, depending on whatever situation may come up. And so here's kind of how this would work is we start school on August 31st, and school opens in phase 4 or 5, and we have face-to-face instruction. And a month into school, the school buildings have to close because of an outbreak. We would then transition into our remote learning. This would be taught on an online platform that we are exploring right now. And so if I'm in a 6th grade math teacher and I started my year off teaching face-to-face, I would then have at the same time have a remote learning option on an online platform where that I could transition to. And so we say, okay, school's closed, we're not coming next week. I want everyone to transition into our online platform to continue these standards that we've been learning about in class. And so that scenario, there's a lot of scenarios for why we would use or could use a remote learning option. This wouldn't be the family that wants to go full virtual for the year because, you know, they're just not sure what's going to happen with COVID. Maybe they don't want to send their kid back wearing masks, or some of the restrictions are, you know, too invasive for them. So they're like, you know what, I just want to do full virtual. I can plan my year out. That's what I would like to do. The remote learning is a little bit different than that because we want that to be a little closer aligned to the face-to-face. So let's say we start in phase 4 on August 31st, and we're in phase 4, and there's some families that say, you know what, I'm not comfortable for whatever reason until we get to phase 5. They could elect to engage in remote learning so that they're connected to their classroom teacher, so that when phase 5 opens up, they just come right back into the school building. And so then they come right back into that 6th grade math class, and they had the opportunity to, you know, while they were gone, learn those same set of essential skills or standards that, you know, that teacher was teaching for the month or the 2 weeks or whatever that they were gone. Another scenario worth mentioning is, let's say we start face-to-face and the year's going great, and then somebody comes down with COVID. One of our students get COVID, and they have to quarantine for 2 weeks. We want them to have access to the same content, the same set of standards as their peers would be getting face-to-face. So they have to be gone for 2 weeks. We don't need them to go enroll in a full virtual option. They can go into this remote online learning platform and hopefully have some flexibility in keeping up with things while they're gone. So the idea here would be is that teachers would, as they develop their face-to-face instruction, they would be developing a parallel online platform alongside their teaching so that they can transition kids or the whole school in and out of remote learning or face-to-face. Because one of the issues that happened way back on March 13th when we canceled, the people that were prepared to do this, and there were some teachers that were already using a lot of online features, they were like, great, I can get a Chromebook in a kid's hand and keep going. The majority of us said, oh my goodness, we're not prepared. How do we get work to kids? And so we can't be faced with that dilemma again. We want to be able to have some flexible re-entry into face-to-face or into remote, depending on what's going on. And then, of course, if we were in a full school shutdown, phases 1 through 3, we would offer this same remote learning platform. So on the survey that many of you took, we asked about remote learning, whether there was a preference that teachers would sort of create this remote learning platform from the ground up, or would the district purchase a platform that had a lot of instructional components and bones to it that teachers could then customize, you know, the scope and sequence or put in their own resources. But essentially, there are some online platforms available that would have video lessons and assessments and constant feedback with students. There's things that we could purchase that would have all of that in there, but you could make it your own. Knowing the whole time that face-to-face, we're not trying to replace face-to-face, We're just trying to be prepared so we can continue to keep learning, moving forward in whatever phase that we are in. So I hope I explained that well. If I didn't, get into comments for more clarification. There was a great deal of conversation about how to explain those, the difference in those, what we would like to offer. But I think this is kind of where we landed. So please ask questions about those.
So Mr. Lombard, if I could jump in there for a minute. So if we have students who are at home working on the online platform, couldn't we just have students sit in a classroom and work on that same online platform here at school?
That's a great question, and one kind of one that begs you to ask that question and say, great, we could just put them on this remote learning. I spent all this hours doing that. We are making the commitment that we value the face-to-face. We value the art of teaching of our teachers here, and we don't want them doing that. Now, if school started in August face-to-face, we want you to familiarize your kids with what that remote learning platform is going to look like, but that is not intended to be a substitute for face-to-face. So I wouldn't want you to do that, Mr. Graydonis, just putting all your kids on a computer and then kind of backing off, because we feel strongly that you as teachers and educators are not going to be replaced or should ever be replaced by technology. We just need a little stepping stone throughout, and we don't want you to do that. So.
So a question that just popped up here is there a plan for PD to learn a new platform? And while we don't have the days and everything laid out, we have made a commitment to, yes, there will be PD opportunities to learn any new platform. And we're working with the FEA again this afternoon to talk about calendar. But even if we put PD before school, that does not prevent us from offering other opportunities. Using the CARES Act money, we can provide trainings, we can provide online trainings, and we can provide some stipends for teachers to come in and participate in those to get ready for the school year. So yes, we're definitely committing to professional development on whatever platform is selected for this. So let's jump to the next one, which has some considerations here that we've talked about. Albert's already mentioned some things that we consider face-to-face to be our most effective learning environment, and that remote learning is not going to be as effective. You're not going to have that same ability to have the conversations and the relationship and to be able to provide that level of support. However, under the circumstances, if we are not allowed to be in school, we have to accept this as an alternative to face-to-face and do the best we can with that. When it comes to the virtual academy in Allegan County, one of the things that we talked about is, well, why don't we just start our own virtual academy here? You know, other districts have done it, and let's just do that here. What we find is a lot of districts, when they do that, they end up partnering. When Fennville did that before, we actually went through the K-12 online and had a connection there. We found that it would be difficult for us to make sure, not knowing exactly how many students are going to be in the seats and how many students would be online, to provide a teacher of record for every content area, which is, if students are receiving all of their new instruction this way, we would want to make sure we have a grade level and content certified teacher for every area. And that's why partnering will be able to provide that. And we're looking at survey results. So we've got some early results back from both staff and parents. Again, I appreciate the really, really thoughtful comments and so forth that have come back from both parents and students. We have some unique things there. One that's coming out in the parents survey is some parents are saying, my kids are ready to come back to school, that I'll send them tomorrow. I'm not worried about this, I'll send them tomorrow. Others are saying that if masks are required in school, my child's not going to be there. So you've got these, and those are the ones who are ready to send them. But on the other side, we have parents who are saying, well, I might send them in phase 4, but I might want to wait until phase 5. We might want to wait there until we get to phase 5, but only in phase 5 if the requirements of phase 4 stay in place. So we've got some work to do on this to determine what direction we're going to go, and we're going to try to meet the needs of the most that we can. But we have to also realize that there are still going to be some out there who are hearing at home that, you know, this is a hoax and we shouldn't be worried at all. And we have others on the other side who are saying, you know, do not step outside of our house without a mask, and you wear your mask all the way in the car to school, and so forth. So we want to be reasonable. We want to be responsive and try to take into consideration those needs. But as Albert mentioned, we're also going to stay in good communication with our health department and learn from them what we should be doing. And if we have some questions, we'll rely on their advice. Albert, I would like you to make a comment. So if you know, you've had the most recent conversation with the health department and directly with some questions involving here. So if I'm a teacher and I have a student who shows up in my class and their parent has tested positive, and so they've obviously been exposed to their parent. Now, has that just put our whole class at risk, and is our class going to be quarantined?
Yeah, that's a great question, because that's going to happen, and that's happened already since we've had students back on campus. And so I had some lengthy conversations with the health department about that. And that situation that you described would be called secondary, like second level exposure. So mom or dad got it, the kid's been coming to my class all week, and then I get notified that my mom or dad has it at home. Does that mean all of your class needs to go get tested, the school gets shut down? You know, some of the early, why I called the health department is I kind of thought, like, yeah, when that happens, we're closing school, and, you know, it's just gonna be really invasive on those kinds of things. And what I found out is that on that scenario, that particular scenario, which will be very common, I can imagine, is the health department is going to ask a series of questions relating to social distancing and duration of that distancing first, okay? And so the reason that we have some of these safety things in place is to sort of protect us from that conversation later on. So they're gonna say, was that kid exposed to the parent? Sure, there could be a chance that the kid was exposed to the parent, but while they are at school, that's a second level kind of infection kind of thing. And so they're gonna say, were you social distancing with that child? Were you within 6 feet of that child for more than 15 minutes? Okay, and if you reflect on your school year and your teaching and your role in the buildings, that may be hard to say yes to that. Okay, you could think of a few scenarios that may have happened. And then if you say, nope, I was not in contact with that kid for that long. And this is true for both first level infections and second level infections. So if you even had a kid in your class that the parent called and said, hey, my son Brent, he got COVID, and he's in your first hour math class, and he's tested positive for COVID. And they're going to ask you those same questions. Were you within 6 feet for more than 15 minutes? If you said no, they're going to say, congratulations on the social distancing, monitor yourself. It doesn't mean everyone has to go quarantine and all of those things. And some of you may have experience with this. You might have called the health department yourself. You have a family member that tested positive. And then the next question is, if you say, you know what, I was really close to that child for more than 15 minutes. The next question they're going to talk about is the use of masks. And so if you were you both wearing a mask? Was one of you wearing a mask? And what kind of mask were you wearing? So this is where the mask debate gets brought up a little bit. the health department felt very strongly that, that they, depending on what type of mask, and I won't go into all of that right now, that may limit your exposure. However, there is some debate out there among health departments whether a cloth mask, if you said, well, I was wearing a cloth mask and they weren't, or vice versa, or both of us were, that could help the situation, but it's not a guarantee that it will help the situation. They said the first thing that they look at is the first thing that I mentioned is proximity and duration with that infected person. So we have really focused hard during summer school so far, social distance, okay, all the way around. We're gonna social distance, and if I have to lean in with a kid and read with a kid, it's not gonna be for a lengthy period of time, and we're gonna be as safe as possible about it. If we do some of those things, it's gonna avoid closures and interruptions to our school year, as it's inevitable that we're gonna have either a child or a staff member or secondary exposure happen. So if we can do those social distancing things, it's going to protect us and protect our profession, really, to keep schools open in the most healthy way possible. So that was my conversation. Could be different than the information you have or the resources that you look, but Allegan Health Department will play a vital role once the school year starts. I mean, there are other organizations out there like the CDC and pediatrics associations and things like that, but our Allegan Health Department is we're going to have to lean in very closely to them as these happen. So thank you for asking that, Jim.
Yep, and if we do have a case here at school, whether a student or a staff member, we are going to have to, that test positive, we have to report that to the health department. And then they will work with us on our response. So it's going to be, in some cases, situational there. It's going to, like Albert said, what questions they're going to ask in order to determine what the risk level is and what the response needs to be. So even prior to anyone coming into school, we've got some of the screening in place. There's been different discussions in schools, some of the questions out on the legal webinars and so forth about requirements, about waivers, about some of those things. What we want to do is make sure we have as clear directions as possible, and that as we're following those, or as we're getting our students and our parents to follow those, that we're doing it from an educational point and not necessarily starting from a punitive point. You don't have a mask on, go to the office, or, at that point, but educating them on why we do these things, why they're required or why they're recommended for us. And, as I've observed the teachers working with some of the summer school kids just yesterday, just the gentle reminders of your space. When Bob was showing the kids the owl, Bob from ODC was showing the kids the owl, they talked about wingspan, and the kids held out their arms to make sure that they had, proper space for their wingspan, and just some creative ways. And students, if they were too close, they just adjusted, and they didn't make a big deal about it. But then on the legal webinar yesterday, we heard some answers to some questions about, well, what if kids refuse? What if parents refuse? Well, then we're going to address those situations from a handbook standpoint and so forth. But the strong encouragement there was, let's not start from a punitive approach. Let's start from an educational approach. And then only in those extreme cases where, the punitive discipline is necessary, then we would get to those. And hopefully we can create a cooperative environment where the encouragement for each other takes care of most of those types of situations. But we're still going to have questions, and we're still going to have to, as we get into this, figure those things out day by day as those things come up. So,
Jim, there's a couple follow-up questions I'd like to address real quickly about that exposure. So one of the questions is, does that assume everyone is wearing a mask? They don't assume anything at the health department. I'm assuming you're asking about that scenario. They are just going to ask those questions sort of in that order. So it's not going to assume that everyone is wearing a mask, but they're going to ask, was the adult wearing it? Was the kid wearing it? And they're going to analyze every situation sort of case by case. And then also, this is a very sensitive question, is would a scenario like you described be released to parents so they could understand what would be played out? So the question would be like, if you have a kid in your class and that mom calls you and says, hey, I got COVID, positive test for COVID, I want to let you know this is going on. Well, the second level of exposure doesn't put really anyone at risk unless you were in contact with the mom. And so we wouldn't, as a school, send a letter to your whole class that says, one kid in the class's mom has COVID. Now, when we have communicable disease in a classroom, like regular, so if we had a scabies outbreak a couple years ago at the elementary in a few classes, when we reached a level where we had a scabies case or two in a class, we would send a letter to those families. But that was first level exposure. So the second level stuff, we don't have the right to disclose that information. And we would let the teacher know. And that's what we did this summer, is let anyone that has that educational interest, because they want to monitor that child and whatnot. And then the other question was, does this mean smaller class size if we need to have 6 feet apart? And that is certainly the goal, to be able to social distance. That's another hot button issue. How far, is it 6 feet? Is it 4 feet? What if I'm only 3 feet tall? There's a lot of, I would encourage you to look into that a little bit more. And in the phases, it says we're going to social distance when we can, okay, and as much as possible. And that means as much distance as possible. And so we will have to look at how many kids are in classrooms, if that's even possible at certain thresholds. All right. And then the last question that I see on here for now is, what about a student sitting across another student whose mom tested positive? Do they have to quarantine? And just to reiterate it, they would not have to quarantine according to the Allegan Health Department. That is a second level exposure. That it doesn't mean that kid will even contract COVID, or the next kid would be able to do that. So that was the answer from the health department as of last week. Okay, this information could also change depending on the information that the health department gathers and how this sort of disease spreads when schools open, because it could be a whole new beast for everyone. No one knows what this looks like in a group of a whole bunch of kids. Some other countries do have some early numbers, but we don't know what it looks like. So that could change. So I don't want you to take what I'm saying as forever, because the health department says we take this case by case, week by week scenarios. All right, so I'll turn it back over to you, Jim, and monitor questions further.
I want to make another comment about the social distancing. So we were on a webinar the other day with 3 members of the governor's team that put together this return to school roadmap. And prior to them putting out the roadmap, they had the guidance from the CDC. And if you go back and read the CDC's guidance, they were putting some pretty strict things on requiring social distancing. So, for example, on a school bus, they were saying, like no more than one kid per seat, every other row, and that would be about 12 kids per bus. And they were also talking about in the classroom, a strict 6 feet at all times. Well, the Michigan team looked at that and they recognized that that would not necessarily be possible in all scenarios and in all cases. And so that's where, especially in phase 4, they emphasized the facial coverings more, which helps protect if that 6 feet cannot be maintained at all times. So the focus, there really is no requirement for a strict social distance, but that's encouraged that we maintain that. But in the Michigan roadmap, there's not as much emphasis placed on the social distancing, because they recognized that in schools and kids passing in the hallway, going to their lockers, going to into different classroom scenarios, that maintaining a strict 6 feet would not be feasible for schools to open under that. So a lot of these questions, as you get into some of the specifics, are going to need to be answered, and we don't have all of those answers right now. The questions are very good ones, and they need to be answered. So the last thing on this slide says return to school committee. Actually, this may need to say committees, because there are going to need to be several different work groups and subgroups here. But we as a district are going to need one sort of high-level overarching committee. So Albert, if you want to go to that next slide, I think that's the one that is it. So on our overall committee, the high-level committee, we're going to have our leadership team. So all principals and directors will be involved at this level. And we would like to get at least, or hear 2 classroom teachers per grade band. So K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, and 9, 12, to be able to come to the table with the questions, concerns, and help come up with the answers to some of these questions as they relate to the whole program, the general program. We'd also like to get 2 support staff members on the team. And then we will be developing some subcommittees, for example, for transportation. There are going to be school bus issues and things to be addressed there that really a teacher is not going to be as concerned about that. And so that's one where, Jerry and his team will work on that. With maintenance, there are going to be things that apply to all of us, but exactly how things get cleaned and how things get laid out and that type of thing, that our maintenance team is going to work on that. And I know they've already received a good deal of training, and it's kind of nice to have the connection with Aramark, because they're providing us with some good information and some good training how to care for our buildings. And then, food service. George and his team have done a great job over this whole closing of providing meals and lots of meals there. But how will that work? What is it going to look like for serving? And how can we best get the food to our students? What's the safest way to do that? And the place that we can make that work. So there will be some subcommittees that will be called upon to address some of the specific issues that will be a part of the plan. And we'll be, we've got, a draft of some of the high level things that we will be able to start with. So we're not wordsmithing everything from the beginning, but there are a lot of details that need to go into that. And so in addition to this return to school committee, we are going to need teachers in each building to be focusing on that instructional component and looking at what are we using programming wise, how are we going to implement the instruction piece to teach our students, what are the tools we're going to use, the final decisions on the platform, and those types of things. So there will be plenty of opportunities to get engaged with this. For the high level team, we'll be looking for some volunteers who are really willing to look at all perspectives and consider all the different voices and help us put together the best plan to address that. And those who are interested in looking at transportation and so forth. So I would encourage you to send a message to your principal or director if you're interested in participating on one of these teams or giving your insight or being a part of some of those meetings, and give a little bit of a description of what your interest is, what your expertise would be, to be able to contribute there so that we can have a good team and come up with the best plan that we can for our families. Principals, do you have any other comments about that?
I just think, like I just said to Michelle and Allison, the mass questions, I know those things are really important. At this time, we've been spending so much time trying to iron out some of these bigger details, thinking about coming back to school. And those are the types of things that we're going to need help from staff moving forward. And we value the input of everybody on those. So, in the next, 5-6 weeks that we have left before school, those are the things that we need to be working to figure out how to get our kids safely back in school while meeting the expectations in the return to school guidelines.
We're going to need to be responsive. I mean, we could come up with what we consider a perfect plan today. And although we know there's no perfect plan, we could come up with that today. Things could shift in 3 days, and that plan might not address every situation or address it as well then. So there has to be some resiliency there. There has to be some flexibility so that we're moving together in response to the situations that come up. We also may predict something. We might say, hey, this is going to work great. And once we implement it, we run into some roadblocks or we run into some unanticipated problems. We're going to need to adjust. That I see this happening around campus a lot with our bond project. For example, go to replace the middle school lockers the other day, and you have to take the old ones out first. Well, they found out in taking those ones out, the wall above it was actually attached to those lockers. So then the question, well, do we remove this whole wall above this? If we remove that, then we've got to remove the ceiling. We've got to do, and all of a sudden we're talking, $30,000 or more in additional work just to replace those lockers. Well, we put our heads together and looked at some other options, and they were able to get the new lockers in. They had to do some trimming and so forth, and now they have to come back and do some bracing and some patching. But it's not going to be, $20,000 to $30,000. It's going to be a much more contained cost and arrive at the place where we want to be. So we're going to run across those things in our planning. We're going to run across scenarios and situations that we didn't anticipate. What we need to make sure that we do is we respond with, again, a can-do attitude of we can address this. We've come across some challenges, and we're going to address this one as well. I've watched a lot of sports teams on the court where when they start to, things might be going great. They could be up, say it's basketball, they could be up by 15 points. And all of a sudden the other team scores a couple threes, and now it's less than 10. And I've watched players on the court, and if they start pointing at each other and start pointing fingers and blaming, and it very quickly can turn south and they can lose that game. But if you have a leader on that court who's saying, shake it off, get back in the game, keep your head in the game, don't worry about it. Those are the teams who can put some of those things behind them. Those are the teams that can go on to some greater success. And we're going to have to do that for each other. One of the things is we make decisions today based on the information we have in front of us. Tomorrow, we might have more information that we didn't have today. And it may be that today's information doesn't have the outcome we want, but with tomorrow's information, we can make a better decision. And that's where we need to keep looking for that information, keep adding to it, keep revising and refining so that we can continue to improve. One other comment I want to make here, Albert, and I don't know if there's another slide after this one that I'm missing, but another comment that I want, just to encourage staff members is be really careful with your social media participation about these things. We're seeing more and more stories of where people put what seems like an innocent opinion out there, and others just start attacking it or start going after it, and then you have a whole lot of energy spent over what was seemingly just an opinion out there on social media. I'd really encourage you not to fall into that fray, especially things that are public and out for everybody. But before we wrap up here, I want to say that there are some unknowns here. One is student count. if you have the opportunity to talk to legislators, I would encourage you to encourage them to base our student count numbers for our funding on the 1920 school year, those numbers, because with all of the uncertainty here and changes, we we don't know exactly what our student count's going to be. And if we have, I mean, right now it's showing that maybe 15% of our kids want to go virtual. Well, that would be a huge hit, but yet we're still expected to respond to come up with these plans and staff appropriately. So that's one. We don't know exactly how many are going to do virtual remote, and that could change in 2 weeks if our status changes, if our phase changes. The other thing that we don't know yet is the foundation allowance. The state has not set that. They don't have a state budget, so it makes it really hard to plan. They've said there's a shortfall of $650 per student in the state aid fund, and they don't really have a plan right now of how to fill that in. They're hoping to use some federal funds if they become available, but we do have some federal funds to meet the extra costs of masks and sanitizer and some of those things. We also don't know what the impact on at-risk funds, because those are state funds. The other thing that they told us the other day is they don't know if the pupil accounting manual and how you get to count students in a virtual program or for remote learning, how do you do attendance and so forth. They're telling us that will probably be part of the budget discussion that will continue into September. So we're going on some faith here that they're going to continue to fund in ways that they have based on the 1920 pupil accounting manual, but the 2021 one has not been written yet. It's a little frustrating, but we still have to move forward. Again, the phases, that could change. It's going to change based on health department, and that comes to us from the state level. Another question that we have is related to staffing. We've all heard the concerns about substitute teachers and so forth, but also we have concerns about what if, in different regions, what if Ottawa County, which is in a different region where a number of our teachers live, what if they drop to phase 3, but we're in phase 4? And we could continue face-to-face, but all of a sudden a bunch of our teachers have kids who are at home and their school is closed. We don't know exactly what that's going to mean, or if it will even be, I mean, maybe our region and their region will, the governor will treat us similar, but we don't know that. And so some of the questions that come up of, well, how is this going to be? We don't know. And it's hard to not know, but we're going to do the best we can to be prepared for whatever situation comes our way. So, and then we've got the surveys. I know that's the next thing. Surveys are out there. If you know of staff members who haven't taken it yet, please encourage them to do so. We may be coming out with some more surveys where we try to get into some more specifics of things. But one of the big questions that we really want to answer is, what is it going to take for us at school? What things do we need to have in place? What information do you need so that you as a staff member feel safe in coming to school and doing your work? That we have taken the appropriate measures, that you can conduct your work with students, and that we can move forward in that. I don't want staff members being scared every time they come on campus and worried about that we're not doing things appropriately. Now, we want to do it based on the data, based on the advice. We want it to be a rational decision and not just an emotional decision on that. But some of those are hard. We care about each other. We care about our families. We care about our students. And so we want to make sure that we're responding well to that can carry us through that. I just want to express my appreciation for each one of you coming on here and hearing some of the discussion. I know we haven't answered all of your questions, And you may go away a little disappointed, hoping that you would come on here and have such and such a question answered. Over the course of the next 2 weeks, we hope to get answers to a lot of those that we have control over. And some of those answers are going to be, we'll see, or it depends. And yesterday we heard from Lisa Swem from Trone, and there were several times where she answered, it depends, to the questions that we have. We've got a lot of work cut out for us, and we can work on these things together. And I appreciate the principals and the leadership team and the research that they've done already to help understand what the requirements will be. I appreciate our board last night engaging in some good discussion around this. And they too have, they've got a range of opinions and so forth. We need to draw those together into a plan that we can all stand behind. So principals, or is there anything else you would like to add? Anything that I've missed?
I just wanted to say thanks to everybody that took the time to join us and ask questions and think critically about how this will happen. I just want to ask that everybody continues to be flexible, like Jim talked about earlier. There's no set path to, making this work perfectly for everybody, but I think if we all pitch in together and have open minds and continue to be flexible, we can do what's best for our students to the best of our abilities.
Yeah, and I'll reiterate and echo that a little bit. What Brent said is, and even what Jim said is, I appreciate everyone being here today. And as we work through this, there are going to be different opinions on different things. And if we can come together to try to solve those, I think that's where the power is going to happen. And we can be collaborative. And I know we have the people that can do that. So before you just, want to be divisive about something, let's talk about it. Let's try to work through a situation, because there's a lot of things that could put a wedge between our staff, and please don't let that happen. I'm here to listen. If you want to talk about those things, I'm here to fight for the kids and fight for you guys. So thank you for being here, and I know we can do this, and we're going to do this together.
Agreed. I want to thank everyone too for coming today, and just encourage you to keep an eye on your email, because we're going to be asking for input. We want as much input from the staff and everyone who's going to be affected. We want as much input as possible. The issue, of course, is the timeline. So it's, we've got to make some decisions very quickly, and people are busy. So we're going to put the information out there. We're going to get as much input as we can from everyone in a lot of different ways, whether it be surveys, some more meetings like this. I'll be sending out an invite for my staff meeting tomorrow. We're going to be doing those weekly update meetings, but Brent and I will be working. It'll be great if we can have a K-12 program platform that works for everybody. But if it has to be a 6-12 and a K-5, depending on, because some of them only offer a 6-12. Again, we want to get input. We'll be putting those invites out there. We'll be watching some videos, doing some demos. We want to make a decision pretty quickly, because we recognize there's a lot of training that's going to need to happen, right? A lot of training and learning a program and going in and customizing a program to make it as seamless as possible. And the sooner we can get that ball rolling, then the better shape we will be in when school starts. So it's going to be a difficult task, but we can do it. We can handle it. Just again, we'll be as flexible as possible. We're going to put lots of stuff out there. Get as involved as you can. And we got this. We can figure it out. We're going to be okay.
So one other thing, if you do come around campus, you're going to see that it's a bit of a mess around here. Don't even go in the high school right now, unless if during the day you need to have a hard hat on. And one of the questions is, how is this all going to come together in time? And those are the things that keep us awake at night, the construction managers and so forth. But one of the things I'd like you to be thinking about, if you're a classroom teacher, is in the arrangement of your classroom come fall, we're going to want to make sure that our classrooms are somewhat sparse, that what's out in the classroom are the things that we need. And we're going to want, stacks of papers and extra things and so forth to be put away. Because an additional burden has been added to our custodial staff in doing the cleaning, and we're going to need to make sure that they're not going to have to move a whole bunch of things that in order to clean surfaces and so forth. They've been doing, you know, their typical thorough cleaning of the buildings. Right now they're out of the high school, but they're working in the other buildings. And as we brought students back, they're continuing to work on those things. We want to help, even with our students, when we wrap up the day, we want to make sure that that classroom is going to be in a situation where they can come in and not have to move a lot of stuff, that they can clean the surfaces and then move on to their next place, because there have been a lot of things added to their plate, and we're grateful to them, and really to everyone who's working in this summer program now, all the way through, you know, from our transportation staff, the support staff who are working there to help do the screening and those things. There's a lot that's already happening, and we're learning from their experiences, and that is going to help us come up with an even better plan. So, Albert, if you would save the chat in here so we make sure we have those questions and we can continue to work to address those things. We did not record, or at least I did not record this particular session. I'm not sure if one of the principals did.